Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to my Family Office TV and my private membership group, SFO Continuity. Very fortunate today, the most important driver of family and family office success. It features a very special guest in Mark Tepsich. Mark is the Family Office Design and Governance Strategist at UBS. This will be a wide-ranging discussion, long-form interview with Mark. He also is a former executive in a single-family office and, of course, integral to the family office initiatives at global bank and industry giant UBS. And UBS has some of the best research, which I have used for years prior to even meeting Mark, and insights on the single-family office community, not just domestically, nationally, but internationally. And those are all things among a variety of subjects that we're going to cover. We do encourage our audience, specifically my members who come in through the webinar feature, to interact and ask questions. And there are certain segments that we do highlight for the members of my SFO continuity only, and not as much to our live or our more public audience. Although I do like to give content away, and I do hope you enjoy Family Office TV. But again, to really be integral to what I do, you do have to go to angelorobles.com and really participate and join. And that's where the opportunities for our over 30 private programs that we host throughout the year. A little bit of very brief housekeeping. I said my pedal would be to the metal this summer, and I'm not kidding. Really, since Memorial Day, it's been very, very busy. I just got back from the Opal Newport Conference, a prominent, more social gathering in the family office community. Left early in the morning and drove back and met some very, very good single family offices, more some of the private parties that were being hosted, and really helped with some of the insight of the things that I talk about. For those of you that are watching or hearing this live, tomorrow I'm doing a private Zoom where I will, lucky all of you, pontificate for about 30 or 40 minutes on my experiences over the last 30 days in investing. We have the Trump assassination attempt, the changes, obviously, in the Democratic Party, the markets broadly, public markets being down. And I got a lot of insight from some incredible families, including several deca-billionaire families and some larger families that I met up in Newport, Rhode Island in the last couple of days. If you would like to be a part of that private Zoom, I'll open up a couple of spots to, let's go with the word outsiders. You have to DM or text me. So if you do so, that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. I also have an incredibly active schedule with programming with incredible guests like Jason Ma coming. And I met a 22-year-old, and we're going to talk about Next Gen and Rising Gen with Mark, that he's going to appear on the show in about a week or two and talking about driving successes as a rising generation family member. He's also very active in investing in geopolitics, and we have a lot of content, especially member content coming up in August. On that note, we're going to begin, and as a bonus to all of you, for like the first time ever, the first question I ask with Mark is actually going to be the question in the title. So I'm not going to leave it hanging for an hour and a half. We're going to get right to it. But before I do that, I want to welcome our special guest. Mark, welcome to the show.
Angelo, appreciate the opportunity and great to see you again.
My pleasure. I've been looking forward to this for a while since we planned it. And again, because I'm curious and I want to learn. So we'll get right to it. What is the most important driver, in my opinion, of both family and family office success?
It's culture. Culture is the strategy, right? And so you talk about how families have built their wealth. You talk about how families have built their businesses. It came down to culture. It came down to their behaviors. It came down to their actions. It came down to their philosophy and values that they put into practice, right? And so you talk about governance, and governance is a big word as we kind of transition through this great 85, 90, $100 trillion wealth transfer, whatever it ends up being. It's culture. And governance is a component of that. And I would argue governance is a subset of culture, right? And so I think your next question might be, what is culture?
You are a mind reader as well, Mark, because it means prospectively different things to different people. To you, what is culture?
So I will admit it's challenging to define. I'm going to throw out a few different definitions in a few different contexts, but they all relate to the family as an organization. And so I'm going to use Ben Horowitz's definition, which is, what you do is who you are, right? And so what you do, how you do it is who you are. It's your identity. It's your brand. Obviously Ben Horowitz has had a great career in the venture capital space. That's within the business organization context, right? But if I look at a family, they are an organization as well. And so how are you a high opportunity family? Are you freezing your culture? Are you incorporating the next gen to also get practice with, making decisions? Are they, or are you a non-transparent family, non-transparent culture, which tries to freeze the practices, which tries to prevent opportunities and insight for that next generation? And let's be honest, like if you've got a wealth creator, they've built, a business, they've built wealth, they've accumulated a wealth. It becomes then, how do you preserve it and how do you grow it? It comes down to the practices, behaviors, and the biggest predictor of behaviors is the culture that these family members have to navigate in, right? So I'll just lay that right there. Culture is the strategy. You see that in business organizations, you see that in organizations in general, and a family is also an organization.
I completely agree, and I'm so happy that you feel that way. Although apparently lately I like to do debates, this is definitely not a question that we're going to have a debate on, because I completely concur. I go back, and my audience knows I'm a huge advocate of Peter Drucker. I kind of think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I believe it was his quote, but I'm going to attribute it to him anyway, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. When I'm consulting the families, I'll probably give a little bit more of a dictionary definition of the verbiage of culture, but I do agree that it could have different contexts to different people. The making and collective values, beliefs, purpose, and goals that lead to a social construct is kind of what we call culture. Now, I think you nailed it with Horowitz, and I've heard Horowitz speak before, a big fan. Amazing that a guy my age is so knowledgeable, as he's like a rap, by the way, rap music, encyclopedia knowledge going back to the 80s. So if you didn't know that about Ben, you definitely know that now. If you email him and you do something, if you're into rap music with a reference, especially back in the day, the 80s and 90s, you will get his attention and he'll email you back. But
good enough.
Taking that a little further, you're not who you think you are. You are your routines, your actions, and your behaviors. Where do you think that families, or if you want to focus on your experiences as a family office, working in the family office, where does that sometimes go off the rails?
Yeah, I mean, I think, this whole accumulation of wealth is somewhat new to humanity, right? I mean, if you think about it, obviously there's been wealthy people, for hundreds of years, but when you think about it, these are somewhat new questions. So let's just use wealth creators. They grapple with that. I mean, I've talked to enough of them, been close to enough of them over the years, where they come at a business strategy or an idea or a vision with such conviction. But when it comes to like, what's the strategy for that next generation? I don't want to use the word fear, but sometimes they can operate with fear, which is exactly opposite how they've lived really their professional and their business life. Mm-hmm. And so what I mean by that is they don't know how to engage with the next generation family members. How do you bring them in? What do you tell them? And the question is, they often go right to the balance sheet, right? And it's like, I can't lay this in front of them. And I'm like, listen, the balance sheet is a result, okay? If you help them understand how these things work, a business works, it was not that easy to create the result, which is the balance sheet. So how do you bring them into the fold? How do you, expose them? Again, I use the word opportunities. You could use governance, and I think governance can do a good job in that. But let's be honest about governance. You might meet quarterly for an hour and a half. Okay, is that really enough to expose the next generation to? Because I use the term enterprise literacy, right? So if you're talking about investment strategy, it's not just math. It's how are you engaging with advisors and leveraging to help you make decisions. That includes investment advisors, that includes attorneys, that includes CPAs, That includes family office staff. How are you managing them? That doesn't only come through like 6 hours of governance a year, right? And so how are you bringing that next generation in the fold? What do those opportunities look like? You can use an investment committee, but I think it goes back to somewhat, which is transparency. And when we think about transparency within this context, as professionals, we think about it, oh, it's transparency of information, which I think is important. But what we're often missing in this transparency conversation is transparency of behaviors, right? So if you're the wealth creator, or if you're, in a multi-generational family, that next gen, whether they're 15 or 30, they, how are they witnessing you, managing people, taking a vision or strategy and turning it into reality, doing that across the investment portfolio or the business or even the private foundation, right? And so it's all that, and governance can play a part in it, but I think it only needs to be a part, right? It's necessary, but not sufficient.
And again, we're talking about something that sometimes for people in finance, it's a little bit hard for them to wrap their arms around for the reasons we noted in culture. They may feel they know it when they see it, or more importantly, feel it. But sometimes it's hard for them to, how do I measure it? Speaking of Peter Drucker, therefore, if I measure it, I could get better at it. And I think part of that comes down, and you mentioned governance, and trust me, audience, we will get to governance. I probably have a little bit of some contrarian views on that, so hopefully that'll be an interesting discussion. But I think it was Tim Knight, a private coach that I'm familiar with, and years ago I interviewed, that said leaders create culture. And a little bit of what I said before, culture shapes behavior and behavior produces results. If leaders create culture, how do you define leadership in the family itself? And we got to be careful not to be maybe too top down. And how do we define leadership, which may be distinct but intertwined within the single family office?
Yeah, let me see if I can unpack that. So you're exactly right. It's set at the top, right? But everybody needs to participate. So when I think about leadership, let's use the wealth creator, for example. You cannot be controlling, right? People need to come at something, let's use the investment portfolio or governance, as their own authentic self. And so if you're controlling somebody or making decisions or lording over them, or right, you are not allowing them to act as their authentic self. So you have to be a facilitator. You have to create those conditions to where they can have the opportunities to be themselves, come at the business, the portfolio, the philanthropy, new venture creation, whatever you want to call it, as their authentic self. You need to create those opportunities. You need to help create those transparency. And it's challenging because, let's be honest, everybody's busy. Not every next generation is working in the business, nor should they. And so how do you create those? You could use governance, but you also have to, what I'll call, hang out and collaborate outside of that in a bunch of different contexts. And it's a challenge because of modern life. Let's be honest, everybody's busy, right? And so, but you're exactly right. The leadership wealth creator needs to create the conditions, and then that next generation, you can't control them, you can't force them, you can't push them, but you could coach them into those opportunities, right? And that's my opinion on it, at least.
And some of that is what I call external and internal opportunities to engage in coaching and mentorship, to look to get better, to not rest on laurels, to not feel that our past successes are guaranteed, to understand that we need to constantly evolve and learn, and have the attitude to some degree, without losing a little bit of our competency, of course, of the ability of, I'm a lifelong learner, I'm a white belt, and what worked in the past may not work tomorrow. And I think the culture part that you bring up, and I'm so glad that you always lead with it, and you're very unique from that perspective in the family office world, I completely concur. Related to that, I think the next subject that I'd like to talk about relates to the concept of the greatest value to me of the family office is to protect the family and family continuity. Even if it's a modest-sized family, the generational impact of that family and happiness is very important. So therefore, the most important determinant to a successful family effectively is the family. The greatest risk to the family, sadly, is probably also the family as well. And that will intertwine the governance that we'll get to shortly. But I believe it was Scott Pepette, who you're familiar with, who's a married-in family member to a gigantic single family office, a pontificator noted in FFI, Family Firm Institute. He talks about money, legal, and family as being kind of an anchor three to many single family offices. Yet, how come the majority, and I think he admitted when I spoke to him, he's being generous when he states only 10% among those three, only 10% is really dedicated to family, yet that's the greatest risk and kind of the greatest opportunity, what we call capacity and capability building inside the family. You worked in a family office. Your role might have been initially a little more classically investment and investing centric, but you saw culture, you saw leadership, and you saw the reality of what Scott said is true most of the time. How do we change that paradigm and get better on helping the family and realizing that even if we're a so-called tactical professional inside a single family office?
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's take a step back. You're at a family office. You're wearing a dozen hats, right? I get it. I've been there. You're running 100 miles an hour, and you're not cranking out widgets for the most part. Everything can somewhat be bespoke. But we wrote about this a year, maybe 2 years ago. A colleague of mine, we took Scott's idea and turned it into basically a white paper, the family-focused family office, which is, hey, family office, your financial administration. Let's just call it generically financial administration. But how can you leverage the family office, specifically in multi-generational context, which, by the way, all wealth will be multi-generational? How do you bring the family together to enhance communication? How do you enhance maybe next-gen development, financial literacy, enterprise literacy? How are you helping them to facilitate governance? And hopefully that leads to better family outcomes over time, right? And so I'll give you a couple examples. Big multi-generational family spread out throughout the country, 3 generations, 50 plus family members. As a family office, you are often more attuned to what's going on with the entire family than any one family member, okay? Because you're the hub. They're calling you, you're a service company. They're leveraging you for, frankly, everything under the sun. So I've seen family offices go out there, create newsletters, right? Which is like, hey, here's what's going on. So-and-so had a kid, so-and-so graduated from college. They went on vacation. Here's what's going on. Career updates. That can help, right? It's all part of the overall mission of the family office. And that's kind of like the next iteration of the family office, like going beyond that, facilitating governance. Governance is not easy. You need time, you need commitment, you need to find time on the calendar. So let's help the family build out the agenda. I've seen so many family offices, going back to the family business, be the de facto investor relations department.
Yes.
Okay. I've seen and the same thing with the portfolio for obvious reasons, right? And so let's talk about the committee. Let's talk about the family business board, maybe the private foundation board. You need to run governance, boards, committees, councils, whatever. It takes time. Somebody needs to build the agenda. Somebody needs to calendar those things. So I've seen a family recently, maybe in the past year, they're doing $6 to $7 billion in revenue as a family business. They're multi-generational. They're on like between the third and fourth generation. They're kind of having a shift there. They actually hired somebody, an attorney by background, to be what I'll call, it's not her title, chief governance officer. And it's exactly what I said: enhancing communication, being in that investor relations department, running governance, facilitating the buy-sell agreement. Because without that, like, somebody needs to own it. And so this family dedicated somebody to that. They made an investment in governance. Okay. And so I think you'll see a little bit more and more of that as time goes on, and families keenly become aware of this, because it's important for all those reasons we mentioned. And it's important to the family culture.
Wow, no, that's great, and great to see that a family did that. There's other variations that's called. I believe it was Jay Hughes, Jim Grubman, and a couple of others. I wouldn't say they may have coined it, but popularized chief learning officer. And that opportunity to build capacity and capability in the rising generation, enhance communication among the family, but also with the family office and the family, since in theory, that usually ends up being an end goal, like I said, family continuity and how important it is. We'll come back to governance, and I promise give it more than it's just due, which it is very important, very shortly. You had an interesting comment, I guess I would say, when we connected privately. that I took a note on. And in building it up a little bit, actually, I utilized UBS research noting that there were, well, how many single family offices are there? The reality is no one really knows. But I believe in early 2019, UBS came out with ballpark about 7,300. Now, it depends on how you classify a single family office, a private company dedicated to the interest of a singular family with dedicated talent, internal, and resources dedicated to that singular family. I would argue, does it have the legal structure, and or is it at least one non-bloodline, quote unquote, key executive? But I think that number felt about right. But I see the difference when I go around and talk compared to near 20 years ago. Like, everyone knows what a single family office is now. So I believe the latest numbers are ballpark 12 to 14,000 single family offices and growing rapidly. And I guess the question is, wow, and they had to deal with COVID too, all in the last 5 years. I guess great for me and great for you, but why do you think it's such massive growth over the last 5 years? Because they have alternatives. And I know I may be putting you in a bit of a tough position, but one of them is just giving it all to the big giant banks who have wonderful talent, or giving it to an appropriate asset manager, or AKA MFO. Now, this may relate a little bit to my debate with Jamie McLaughlin, but I want to hear your perspective on the massive growth and why.
So for one, the growth, in my opinion, is due to middle market private equity activity, right? So if you're thinking, if you've got a sub $2 billion family business, what were your options before? It was to go public, right? And that was unpalatable to a lot of families for obvious reasons. Now private equity exists, right? So they have another option to exit. And so you've seen the growth of private equity over the past, since the great financial crisis. And so to me, that led to the, number of liquidity events, which the families had their infrastructure for wealth management, let's call it, trapped in that business, right? That value was managed with an infrastructure of the business. Now, all of a sudden, you've got a substantial amount of liquidity. Now, the reason why, okay, so you've got the exits. Now, what do you do with it? The reason why you've seen the growth of single family offices is a market failure. That's why. And here's what I mean by that. Families, there's value in keeping, centralizing a lot of these activities under one roof. And I will say, and by the way, I will say the vast majority of family offices that we deal with, and I'm talking even the $30 billion family offices, are not 100% vertically integrated, okay? But when there's so much complexity with these families, and when you look at family offices, they're actually an agent of their family, okay? They are an investment firm, they're an accounting firm, they're a tax firm, a legal firm, an insurance firm, travel firm, HR for the domestic staff, residential. There's no one single firm that can manage all that for compliance reasons. If you did, you wouldn't be able to charge enough as an MFO. Okay. And so as a family, you have all this complexity. You've got you could have hundreds of trusts. Let's say you only have 24, which is still a fair amount. You've probably got dozens of partnerships. You've got dozens of residences. And you've got cash flowing, inflowing, outflowing. You got capital commitments. You got capital being recycled from PE. Making any decision within that complex environment is nearly impossible with a completely outsourced, right, without a family office. Because if you're going to make decision X, right, as a family, let's say you want to make a big purchase, or, how does that ripple across estate planning, income tax, wealth transfer, cash flow, liquidity? Where are you taking that capital from? You cannot. So if you were to do a completely outsourced, right, you took it to an MFO, right, with an accounting back office, you would take the knowledge of all that stuff and reside it outside of the family. You would have less institutional knowledge. This is why primarily I see a lot of family offices being created. You've got so much complexity that one single firm can't do that. Going back to this vertical integration, I don't see many family offices being 100% vertically integrated. Even the largest ones, right? They are taking on because I see this conversation a lot, and this conversation is focused on the investment side of things. Saying that most family offices shouldn't exist, that's through a wealth management firm lens, okay? It's not through a family-centric lens.
Exactly.
And so And so it just becomes a challenging environment. So I see a lot of families that they'll outsource a fair amount of the investment to us or similar competitors, right? And they'll reside in-house because families are constantly getting pitched. They've got different initiatives. They're investing in whatever they want. Okay. They're not this absolute return focused family. They've got a lot of stuff that frankly doesn't make sense in a portfolio, but they're happy to take a flyer on it. Why? Because if you're worth $1 billion, you want to allocate $10 million a year to something that may have zero return but a huge payback. Nobody else is really going to underwrite that for you. Okay, so that I see a lot of families keeping stuff in-house that they have a competitive advantage with, and maybe that's directs in a specific industry or niche, and then outsourcing the rest of it. And they do the same thing with tax and legal, right? And so to say that family offices are going to, the number of them is going to collapse. With that said, the industry has really come a long way since the global financial crisis. And let me explain. Nobody knew the term family office 15 years ago, right? It wasn't conventional wisdom or common knowledge. It was there, it was in pockets, but you've had the growth of the family office industry. What you had in return was a response of the service industry. So think firms like ours, UBS, think firms like Mirador, think Anderson Family Office you could run the general ledger through them. Mirador will do your ADAPAR, things like that. So there are more options to outsource. With that said, I would actually think that makes family offices more efficient because you don't have to hire, instead of hiring 12 people, maybe you hire 10. Okay. And so it's been an interesting response from the industry to build out all this infrastructure and create an industry around it. Same thing with private trust companies, right? I mean, you've seen the growth of that along with the family office industry too, in certain jurisdictions, Wyoming, South Dakota, primarily. But I'll just pause there because I know that was a lot.
No, that's fantastic. Again, your experience working in a real, legit single family office over years and your role at perhaps the bank globally that touches the most significant families, your insight is golden. So, given your status and your role there, it's greatly appreciated. Maybe my note that I wrote is phrased a little bit not proper English or proper. I'm looking at it now. And I think you somewhat answered it. But the question is related to what we were just talking about. How is the industry wrong on their responses to the growth of family offices?
I don't know if it's the industry, but I think it's some people, right? Everybody's got an opinion. And I'm not talking about Jamie. I watched some of it, and I agree with some of it, and I disagree. But that's just a common refrain, so to speak, right? So I'm not pinpointing any one person. I have a lot of respect for Jamie. But to say that, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, is there's just so much complexity running through these families and family offices that you cannot outsource it. Okay. You can't have, now I've seen some families that they attempt to do that and it just doesn't work because, like I said before, making any decision within that environment is a challenge. But it oftentimes depends on the family style and preference, whatever. I think I'm a perfect example of that, which I'm part of the industry. UBS invested in me in my role to help our clients actually build single family offices, right? Because I've been in one, I understand it. I've been a family office executive, so I've sat in the family office executive's employee's shoes. And so I would say if you look at the term family office, now everybody has family office, right? RIAs, MFOs, whatever. It's losing its meaning to an extent. It's like saying, I'm going to go Xerox something, even though you're not using the Xerox brand, right? Like you're using Hewlett Packard or something, or Google, you're going to go Google something. So and I know the ultra high net worth institute's trying to drive this forward too, is like, what does it mean to offer family office services or to be a family office? And I think this is great for the industry. So I don't think that the industry is wrong. I think the industry is right. I just think certain opinions are wrong on this, that you're going to, as long as wealth is being created, you're going to see the growth of family offices. That doesn't mean the service industry is not going to come and say, listen, we could do some of this better for you and you could outsource to us, because you're going to have that, right? It's a business opportunity.
Of course. And related to that, and by the way, I greatly appreciate my friend, Jamie McLaughlin, coming on. I've known Jamie since I basically, maybe literally the first day that I started many year ago, Family Office Association. Now, of course, he was wrong and I was right relative in terms of our debate, but he did bring up some good points. Like I stated, if you're wrong, you learn, and it's an opportunity to throw your beliefs and ideas out there and have them challenged, maybe raise our voices a little bit and yell. And I don't think these things happen enough. And to his credit, I did approach others that would lean more towards some of his perspective, and they want no part of something they would feel a little uncomfortable in, because it isn't the vanilla and down the middle that they want, that they're not going to get from me, and they would not be able to beat me anyway. But besides that, related to that subject, because I'm not going to let it go, and that related, if I had to really simplify it, I think Jamie and others believe that sub-billion-dollar single-family offices somewhat shouldn't exist. They don't have the scale, they don't have the governance, their operational excellence and talent and time and compensation is not adequate enough to be excellent. My counterpart to that would be, you're making the assumption that the alternatives are all incredible. They're not. They're limited. In anything, there's going to be averages, below average, and good. And maybe, generously, 10% are great. My debate to that on the so-called smaller side, and it somewhat depends on smaller, closer to 100 million or 750 million, because that could matter, is the problems are all internal. It's the single family office's issue, not outside forces that are not making them effective and efficient. They could bring in top tier talent. They could compensate them correctly. They could incorporate proper operational, tech stack, and best practices. There's a variety of reasons why that we don't need to get into every one like that near hour and 38-minute debate did. But broadly speaking, and it's funny that we're calling a sub-billion-dollar family office effectively a small family office. What is your perspective and your experiences having worked in a family office relative to internal control, privacy, and customization, especially the control part that nothing could ever match what a single family office could do? And from my perspective, and I know most disagree with me, engaging the rising generation in the family legacy and wealth, and understanding, and in my opinion, buying and controlling private companies helps to engage the rising generation dynastically. And that's what it means to have, and pardon the politically incorrect term, a family empire. Mark, all yours.
Yes. So let me try to take that one at a time. I will say, listen, let's be honest. If you look at a family office like a business, there are great family offices, like you said, and there are ones that can do a better job. I will say, with that said, I have yet to meet a family office executive that wasn't just trying to do the best job they can for the family, because it's a very personal job, right? It's a very personal profession. I think I said it before, family office employees are like cultural anthropologists. You're sitting there watching and witnessing a family trying to navigate, adapt, and evolve to the future. And they're doing it with their enterprise, and they're doing it with the family members. And it's a challenge, right? They're trying to make all these decisions, and how does that comport with their values or not? I will say, for family offices that have high complexity but low budget, meaning you can have significant family enterprise technical complexity, trust, partnership, but you have a lower budget because your balance sheet isn't that big. You do have challenges, because you need to build out those services. You need to, you probably need to engage Sage Intacct on the accounting front. That's not QuickBooks. That's something more expensive than QuickBooks, but it's going to do a better job. So you need to create systems, adopt tech to help you become more efficient. Those family offices are challenged because high complexity, low budget because of low balance sheet. But I will say, there are more options out there for those family offices to plug into. They don't have to be vertically integrated. They should be open architecture. You hear RIA say, hey, we're open architecture. You're open architecture, but you're only open architecture within your four walls to an extent, with the talent there. Family offices are truly, if they wanted to be, open architecture, because you can go and engage any RIA, MFO, bank like ours, right? Which I would say to do, please. And so leverage that, because that can help you scale. But that's what I would say is it's a challenging environment, but I would also say I loved, it was a large family office that was added around 15 employees, 50 plus family members. And we had a big budget and a lot of complexity, but guess what? It was always something new because you had, kind of the stuff that you were doing every day, but you had a lot of the next gen starting businesses, getting married, buying houses, starting. So there was always something new that you were helping them advance their own lives, careers, ventures, which I really enjoyed.
Changing the topic a little bit, but I actually think it does relate somewhat to the topic that we're leaving because some families will elect to say, is it a cost center? Theoretically, it is, but I don't know. Other opportunities other than a family office are definitely a cost center as well. It just feels different. And in my opinion, you wouldn't have the level of control. But inevitably, there's going to be a percentage of families that also think they're pretty awesome, that are doing perhaps really a great job in their family office, specifically on the investing. But in theory, it could apply to other aspects of the family office as well. But sticking on the investing front, they may feel they have an edge and they want to create effectively a GPLP structure where they do look to take in outside capital. And now that does increase the complexity. It increases the compliance. It increases the fact that without marketing, you're not going to be able to draw in, quote unquote, the capital. But there was an adage of a sage in the family office world that told me when I was starting out, for families that consider that, do they really want to turn their kitchen where they could do what they want to do, they could mess things up and no one knows, into effectively a public restaurant where now you have to serve clientele, or now you got, zoning and ordinance and all that. You might be able to do very well. Maybe you're special, you make money, that becomes a profit center. But talk a little bit about the changing dynamics of families that look to either become, maybe morph into an MFO, or have an investment strategy where they look to become a GPO.
Yeah, so those are two kind of distinct strategies. I think they're leveraging different skills or silos, whatever you want to call it, of the family. You hit the nail on the head, that last point. Like, hey, we've got this family office, we don't have any headaches, meaning we don't have any investors that we have to answer to, other clients, right? So for the right family, I've seen them attempt and try to become MFOs. Certainly some of them have done that. It can be a profit center, right? And I think for families that have like a strong brand and a strong network, and they've got a great platform, meaning a family office, you can invest in the family office, turn it into an MFO, but you have to go in there with eyes wide open, because it's not like, hey, we're going to be an MFO tomorrow, we're going to start getting in clients, because the service is going to be different for you as a family. You will be regulated, which you are not in a true single family office. But I would say, listen, you are creating opportunities for the next gen. You're creating opportunities for the family office staff, right, to own maybe equity in that MFO. But I think for the right family, that can and could make sense. And I actually have these conversations all the time with families, because they're like, hey, we're, a tech investor. We've got all these like great relationships out here. Because like Iconic, right, is an example of that. They, so Iconic has done that. And I've hear about some Iconic clones every now and then. I talk to them. The other one is your GPLP, and I think you will see more of this. And here's what I mean. So traditionally, when you think about families in private equity, they're allocators as an LP. Maybe they get some co-investment rights, whatever, right? You're going to see families that said, like, listen, we're not happy just being an allocator. In our DNA, we are builders, creators, and risk takers. And maybe they went through a liquidity event and they're saying, like, listen, we've got all this deep industry knowledge. Why are we letting it go to waste? Again, you have to have that want and desire and have investors and all that stuff. But we've got this deep industry knowledge, and hey, now we're fully liquid. We've never been liquid before. We don't want to take 100% of our capital and deploy it back into, building a business. So you're going to see, and I've started to see some of this already. Sometimes they're not going to go form a fund. They may do an SPV, right? A couple one-offs. And they're saying, listen, leverage our deep human capital, decades of industry experience in development, or, name an industry, And you're going to see more of that because there's so much capital floating around out there. And this also, to your point earlier, it creates opportunities for that next gen. You're going to have a platform. You're going to leverage their human capital. And it's another business, right? And they're sitting back and saying, like, listen, the 2 and 20, like, I can leverage, because if you look at a lot of PE firms, they're financial engineers. They don't have a deep industry knowledge. So if families want to do this, I'm starting to see it already. I think it's going to become more and more prominent as time goes on because they're looking at PE funds. They're like, wait a second, 2 and 20. With that said, the timelines are going to be different. If you look at buy and hold of a PE fund, it's 3 or 4 years, right? Even though the fund might last 10. These families, they don't transact that way. They transact over multiple decades. This doesn't mean you're going to invest with them and they're going to hold it for 30 years, although I guess they could. There's space on investors and family office balance sheets to take a portion of this and lock it up for a very long time. Maybe you have the rise of secondary funds, right, because of this strategy. But they're sitting back and saying, like, listen, we could do this. We could be a PE fund, and why not? And so I just think it's, I don't want to say a no-brainer because there's a lot of different considerations. And for every 100 family office out there, maybe 2 decide to do this. But I think another distinction is families are very visible. They understand that their name is behind something. So you've got a lot of family businesses that understand what it is to live and work and play in that community. And they also know that they need to be good neighbors, right? And so they tend to look at things a little bit differently than PE funds that have a 3 and 4 year hold time.
Indeed. And that is one of the classic arguments that some will make relative to attracting proper talent, more so on the investing side in the family office, is that unlike a commercial enterprise, how are they going to build up and have equity? Actually, it's not that hard. Listen to my interview from last week with iconic family office attorney Tom Handler, where in direct investments, very simple, and I'm kind of living through it a little bit myself. I create a holding company, depending on my structure, and or separate holding companies, and I form an arrangement where I give part of the equity to someone who's talented in a given vertical or operator. And that becomes my holding company, my operator, and they have more than just carry, salary, and bonus. They have the potential for equity. Now, I may want to be able to buy that out. There may be golden handcuffs, sure. But what I'm basically trying to state, which I think was a big point of what I stated in my debate, is I'm not saying it's easy, but sometimes the industry overcomplicates things, makes them hierarchical and bureaucratic because it helps their entrenched positions in what they do. They probably don't want you, especially as a so-called smaller single family office, to exist and do more things internally. Now, I think the next questions that we're bringing up are ironically going to a little bit relate to this. And that is going to be, I promised I would come back to governance. Mark, I'm going to start with rather simply, like I did with the culture question, what is family governance to you?
It's really culture manifested. If you're looking at governance, it's really like I said, governance is a subset of culture. Your governance is only going to be as strong or as effective as your culture. And what I mean by that is governance is really a body, council, committee, board, whatever it is, with relationships, and you're talking about a specific thing, right? You got rules in place. That's really what governance is. At the end of the day, it's behaviors of individuals and relationships, right? Your fiduciary, trustee, board member, council, committee member. That's how I approach governance as relationships. I think the industry, right? If you're, whatever your hammer is, that's what the nail looks, I think it often looks at governance as a structural be all end all, and that's a part of it, but it's not the most important part.
I mean, I guess in most simple terms, governance is effectively how decisions are made. And we're all taught, yourself, me, all of us. And I don't disagree that the family, and in my opinion, the family office needs to have a mission statement, a vision statement, and in the case of the family, a family constitution. From there, we learn about the value of family boards, about committees, about councils. I'm not discounting the value that they provide and potentially some of the safeguards. However, given my nature being very entrepreneurial and maybe a little bit of contrarian thinker, uh, I think that sounds initially to me, after it sounds good, but I dive into the practicality now that I'm 20 years in and I travel the world of how this works. It sounds like a lot of hierarchy. It sounds like bureaucracy, and it sounds like a lot of safeguards to so-called protect the family. And what it probably is doing, taking a page from the Seam to Leb, if it's not done properly, is really making the family more fragile. It's making it hierarchical, bureaucratic, slow moving. You think you're safe, and in the short term, that day you might be. But long term, I think it's often done somewhat to the detriment of the family. What is your perspective about that contrarian view? And if I'm half right and the industry of governance is half right, where is the meeting point in the middle where it's not too hierarchical and bureaucratic?
Those are great points. We work with a lot of families that have leveraged governance consultants. They'll go through the process of standing up committees, boards, councils, have a family constitution, and the family, there's a lot of momentum coming out of those engagements, right? Because they're usually 6-9 months, a year long. They draft this, they think of who's going to sit on it, and like the charter. And again, those are all great and they're necessary. But they'll come to us a year later and be like, so we've got this governance and it's not working. And they're like, well, what's not working about it? Like, we haven't had any meetings. It's like, okay, what else? Like, and it just doesn't match the culture of the family. The families are overthinking it. I've worked with families and they're like, there was one family, we must have spent like a day thinking about the name of the council committee. I'm just like, just call Blue Sky. Like, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Okay. So for governance, you said earlier, it's about joint decision-making. I think it's about joint decision-making. It's about de-risking, key man risk of the family. It's also about helping the next gen develop. It's a communication tool, right? So these critical decisions, you're not having one family member make it. But I will say governance or culture creates a lot of trust. And I'm sorry to divert back to culture, but if you have a strong culture and you know how a family member is going to react in a situation, meaning the family business member, CEO, that's through the culture, because you know how they're going to act, react, make decisions, what values framework. Governance is necessary, but it's not sufficient. And so to your point again about we've got all this bureaucracy, I think it's too much focused on structure and not enough about getting together, having meetings. Some families also overthink these meetings. Like, listen, create an agenda, send out the information a couple weeks ahead of time, have the meetings, be consistent about it. Don't expect to move mountains every single meeting. Some of them are going to be great. Some of them are going to be not great meetings. Sometimes you'll miss a month or a quarter or whatever, but stay consistent about it. Governance is a challenge again, because you need time, and there's a lot of stuff in governance that is, I would say, wrong with governance, but it's not so much wrong with governance. It's just, it goes back to the human element, overthinking it, thinking too much structure, and so I think governance is necessary but insufficient.
Of course. And it all ties into leadership that drives culture, the value of culture. Of course, decision making is important, and the opportunity of governance to provide of value inside the family and the family office and how they integrate. I'm not so sure that collectively that is not number one. So do not take my prospective audience as being wrong. I just think often it is both designed somewhat incorrectly and executed and integrated inefficiently, and it becomes sometimes more of an albatross than a benefit. But we do have some special guests coming on governance where I don't know if I want to formally call that a debate, but they're going to disagree with me, and I look forward to learning from them and again sharing multiple points of view. You, again, as I noted several times, have the advantage of having worked in actually a significant quote unquote single family office. We spoke a little bit, or my pontificating, about systems, operations, tech stack, and the value of family offices rising above a mediocrity to become good, to become great. What did you learn, not just in your experiences, but also at UBS and engaging with so many families around the world, about what does excellence in family office operations look like to you? Is it easy identified? And what are some of the common characteristics?
Yeah, I mean, I go back. I keep going back when I get asked this question. And you talk about complexity, and I think the ability to make an informed decision in a family office to cut through the complexity. If you think about a business, they've got often business managers, CFOs. They've got a dashboard, right? That you could see like burn rate, cash inflows, outflows. Family offices can set up something like that, right? And so I think the ability to make an informed decision in a family office should be like your first foremost paramount objective when it comes to operations. Some other things, you cannot only look inward because I've been in the situation. You're running 100 miles an hour. Everything is inward focused, right? Because at a family, you're not looking to get new clients. You're kind of insulated to an extent from everything that's going on around you, the industry and how it's evolving and getting shaped. And I would say to a lot of family offices, like, keep looking outward. Don't only look inward. And what I mean by that is things are constantly changing in the marketplace, in the family office ecosystem, service providers. This is why we actually started the Family Office Quarterly. I call Family Office is Family Office Island. You're sitting on an island. You're with 10 people. You're not at EY. You can walk down the hall and ask the partner that's only doing that, very narrow partnership tax analysis all day, every day for 200 different families. So you have to be a specialist and a generalist at the same time. And so we created this UBS Family Office Quarterly. We've got third parties that write in it. It's not investment focused. You could get that elsewhere, especially at UBS. It's strategy, it's technology, it's operations, it's human capital. We're talking to real family offices. It's governance and legal and tax. And so and a lot of family office executives I talk to are very hungry for this type of information. They're still very hungry for it. And so keep talking to other family offices, keep talking to people in the industry. It's a fine line between safeguarding the family from people that want to sell to them and also being open to like new ideas and new strategies and stuff. So, just going back, it's the ability to make an informed decision and knowing that you can adapt and evolve as time goes on.
Excellent, Mark. And you're correct. Sometimes family offices do become very insular, very siloed. And that does come, I admit, with kind of some advantages, but that comes with disadvantages as well of being too isolated. And again, dynamics are changing. Now, I do admit one of the concepts that I talk about, and I think it's relatively well-meaning, but suppose you're also meeting with other family offices and you don't have enough foundational understanding of what excellence looks like and what real best practices is. So maybe you're actually comparing, no offense, mediocrity to mediocrity, and you don't know any better. And that's not necessarily going to make you better. You do want to swim in the deep end of the pool. You do want to be the quote unquote ugliest person in the room. You do want to challenge yourself to quote unquote get better. You want to be not necessarily where you are now, but inside you is the best version of yourself. And to do that and be isolated is very hard to do. In my opinion, sadly, the majority of people, and I think it could be as high as 90%, they're not outwardly negative or bad, but they're not necessarily adding value to you enhancing and becoming of excellence in the family office, which I've always said, ballpark in my experience, admittingly partially qualitative, is probably about 3%. It's a pretty finite number. You talk about something that's a very exciting topic to me and really integral to family continuity. It may really be anchored to the most important thing to me of family continuity, and that is how to incorporate next gen across the enterprise, because that can mean the family business, the family foundation, the family office, and you might have lived it inside a family office. How do you do that?
So I would say there's a lot of easy ways to do it. The biggest challenge is time. It is getting, oftentimes, the wealth creator on board, because he or she is worried of how is that going to influence, the thought process of that family member, or they're going to know too much and they're not going to be motivated. They're going to become unproductive. I would say the opposite is the bigger risk, meaning you're keeping all this information, understanding how to navigate the enterprise from them if you do not engage them or incorporate them into you could do this through governance, right? And I know Kirby Rosbach, Tamarin talks a lot about this. Like, you've got joint decision making, and you've got an education developmental setting. You could do this. I would say it's actually easier in a large multi-generational family, and what I mean by that is you can have a junior board or junior investment committee that you could peel off a small piece of the portfolio and just have them kind of run with that in a smaller investment committee. You could incorporate the role of board observers, right? They can come attend the investment committee meetings, but not necessarily have the ability to vote, right? Those, by the way, those roles should not last forever, because you cannot sit there as an observer for 10 years. You're just going to really irritate whoever that observer is, right? It doesn't lead to something real. I would say it's a little more challenging at the family business as far as operations go. Certainly there's more opportunity for engaging, whether that's, summer or internships or rotational program when you're younger. But oftentimes, again, it goes back to the wealth creator, like, oh, this business isn't for them. I don't want to get them into this. Because sometimes in multi-generational families, it could be a very political environment. And so that second generation, who've often experienced that or lived that, wants to protect their kids from that. And they say, listen, this family business is not for you. Go live your dreams, figure it out. The issue with that is there's a middle road which you can incorporate them on some level, right? Because you could either force them or you do the opposite, which is like, hey, this isn't for you. And I like to make the analogy to like a farmer. And that's like, the kid sitting there, he's seen the dad, till the soil for like, 2 decades. And he's like, I would really like to get on that tractor one day. And the dad's like, you can't plant anything here. Go figure it out. Go find your own land. And it's really not the most appropriate approach. And so I think there's ways you can incorporate them through governance across the foundation, across in the investment committee. You can make miniature versions of that, right? I've seen a lot of families that, hey, you can only manage the portfolio if you're on the investment committee. The individual family member has zero liquidity, right? It's all in trust. Like, why don't you just peel off a piece, give that to that person and say, here, go find your own advisor and manage this small portfolio. Because otherwise, like, how are you gonna learn if you're not engaging? You can't sit through, a college course and expect to become a good investor. It just doesn't make any sense. So I don't know. It's kind of a ramble, but I think there's a ton of ways. Don't be afraid. The bigger risk is not engaging them. It's not like, they're going to be unproductive. And if you're not engaging them or not being transparent enough, that can really be upsetting to that next generation, because it looks like you do not trust them, right, to engage anywhere in the enterprise. And you need to incorporate them on some level, and it doesn't have to be 100% on day one. And it's not about that balance sheet. It's about how the balance sheet got there in the first place, right? It's about how the business works, the investment committee. So just take it slow, but you could be as creative as you want with this.
I mean, there is no family continuity without it. So really it is integral. I would add the importance of, and this is more of a family issue inside the family, fostering, developing, and encouraging character. Personal morals and character are very, very important from a younger age. And I know this is going to sound a little out of left field, but I've always been, and this could be a challenge in very wealthy families where you're almost punished for having an opinion, for being wrong, or making a mistake. And that word is courage. Courage. We don't have enough lions in the world already. I think those are very important things. Now you're getting some of my private masterclass content and consulting work that I do with families, at least on the most high level, but I think those are very, very important points. We're going to get to in one more minute the importance of UBS as a significant force globally in the community, and arguably maybe has more direct access to proprietary research and insight as to what motivates and interests families on a variety of different subjects. Before I get to that, and I noted earlier some of the upcoming program for those of you that are live that I'm doing tomorrow, about also the awesome 22-year-old that I have coming on, talking about, I might even name that subject, incorporating next gen across the enterprise in my conversation with him, which will be long form and include geopolitical, economic, and investment dialogues. He's very, very smart. He asked the hardest questions on point to a general who attended the conference that most 22-year-olds should really not be asking. So that definitely got my attention. I do have someone coming on for my members, but we'll probably produce some clips. I'm not going to mention his name at the moment, but why don't I bill it, and that's why you have to join, something to the effect of the real deal architect of Deca billionaire family offices. He's incredible. I have a lot to learn from him, and you all do too. And I do have, finally, after all these years, one of my contemporaries. I really wanted to make it a debate, but we kind of agree on about 85% of things. And I do have Carol Pepper coming on probably about 2 or 3 more weeks, very much an international family office consultant. And we have a lot to talk about on economics, direct deals, and investing, as well as other things as well. So stay tuned. As I noted, there's no time off, pedal to the metal, being very, very active and busy. Back a little bit to the great research and work that UBS does. I believe, and I'm going a little off the top of my head, when the report came out, I think ballpark about last summer, so about a year ago, made my heart near and dear, because I think I'm one of the very, very few people in the industry that talks about it, debates it, and has open conversations about why it's absolutely very important to families of wealth, billionaires, and family offices. The number one concern, at least in the prior year's research, and the world has gotten more upside down in the last year, is geopolitical or geopolitics. I believe, depending on the region of the world, rising inflation and recessionary issues might have been 2 or 3. I don't know if there's been an update or some nuances you could add to that, Mark, but I would love to hear what you're feeling and learning in the research of the company as the leading concerns of significant families and their family offices.
Yeah, I mean, that information is based off surveys, right, that we send to our global family office counterparties. And it does a great job of kind of reflecting, the overall and general concerns of these families. I mean, listen, it's hard to say that geopolitics isn't concerning to a lot of people. You can't turn on the news without some calamity happening, whether it's here or, in Pennsylvania or abroad. And it's a challenging time. I mean, everywhere you look, you see that. I mean, but you're alluding to the GFO report. It does harness a lot of data and information from our global family offices.
Indeed. And to assume that geopolitics are totally separate from the super rich and family offices is beyond ignorant. It has an obvious impact on economics, on hedging risk, on investing, on maintaining purchasing power, and simply from a societal perspective. A variety of different things, from sovereign risk to other risk, dollar risk. I could go on and on. Really, its anchor, and at least the larger scale families in your surveys were understanding of that. Was there anything that stood out to you, because we do have a very strong investment centered audience, relative to insights on investing, maybe direct or maybe more so restated public versus private in equity, gold, hedge funds, major differences between US and other families around the world? I know it's off the top of your head because you probably don't have it handy, but anything specifically that stands out?
I don't think it stood out, but I think if you look at the trend of our, GFO report over the past however many years, the trend of allocations to alternative investments has consistently gone up, right? So it's not surprising. Family offices and wealthy families are hungry for those allocations. Now, certainly it's been challenging to receive distributions from them, but I think even in this climate, the demand for those alternative assets, specifically, private equity, is going to continue to rise. Even, rates have been elevated for a few years, so it's been a challenging environment for exits. But I think that's going to continue to increase. You're going to see more PE fund managers being formed from, younger people at those funds peeling off and forming their own. And those emerging managers are great to allocate to, because it's like feast or famine for them, right? They've got to be successful in their first couple, or they got to go back and get a job, I guess. So it's not surprising, but I think just the trend, even within this environment, is you still see a strong demand for private equity and alternatives.
I agree. And I kind of disagree with some of the reasons for the families as to why. I'll discuss some of that in my private Zoom tomorrow at 11 a.m. But if I'm getting 5% in cash, or I'm getting 13, 14% in the S&P or triple Q, what's going to make me move off of that? I know what I own. I'm totally liquid. What's going to be the delta? What's going to be the alpha that I'm going to get going private? And to me, the important part about control and family engagement is I want to do that internally. I want to build it in my holding company and be active in private companies for the reasons that I noted. Internal. Are there certain sectors where I may seek best in breed that are smaller? Sure. And if I'm not a $10 billion family office, but I want international exposure in privates, and I could argue why I might be able to replicate that in the totally public markets. But then, correct, I may need to, quote unquote, source a manager. And of course, when I source it and they're rated top 10 one year, what are the odds they're going to stay that next year, the year after, the year after, the year after? So I don't mean to be critical of the GP-LP structure and industry. I have many great friends in there, some of the smartest people that I know. And like I said, I guess in my debate with Jamie, some of them, maybe 10%, are really good. But even then, it doesn't mean you allocate all or most of your capital there, in my opinion, if you want family engagement and control. But I'm a little bit unique in my perspective on that, and I know not everyone's down with that. We'll see what Carol thinks when I have her on. There would be a trend if there was a similar report that you did, and now we're updating it by 1 year. And you're hearing this, I'm sure, from the families, but I would like to get your insight. And that would very simply be the incredible rise and impact of AI, artificial intelligence. Any feedback or ear to the grindstone that you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, I think how this is going to be applied for family offices, I get a lot of these questions. We just had somebody write an article about that in our quarterly. And I think how it's going to be applied is, it's a conversation that family offices are having, right? How do we deploy this? How is it going to make us more efficient? And I think that's TBD. I have been having conversations with, some tech platforms out there, consolidated reporting platforms out there that say they're doing this and they're incorporating it. It's hard for me to tell. I'm not a tech person, right? So I can barely turn on this computer, if I'm being honest with you. But we do have those conversations like, hey, how is what's out there? How can we adopt some sort of AI somewhere to make us more efficient? At this point, honestly, it's just we don't really have a lot of direction on how family office can deploy it, because those things are still being developed. But I do expect that to be part of the growth of the industry that is an offering for family offices, right? To help make them more efficient, more streamlined, help have more actionable insights and make informed decisions.
No question. The Moore's law about doubling every 18 months, that is not applicable in the world of AI. It's more like 10xing every year. And look at the exponential growth of that a couple of years in. I think it'll be wickedly impactful. I think that we're underestimating what it could look like, maybe not right at this moment, but within probably 18 months to 2 years. And I think there will be massive upheaval from a variety of different perspectives. That creates opportunities from a family to hedge risk, from an investing perspective, and from an operational one as well. Listen to my interview, everyone, with Craig Kaplan that I did about a month ago, give or take a little bit. Actually, it was a series of interviews with Craig, admittingly a little more from the investing perspective as opposed to operational. And by the way, thank you for some of the comments coming in YouTube, Inspirer. Thank you so much. And those of you, especially my members that are in my streaming platform and webinar, feel free to engage and ask questions. And really anyone maybe across some of the live platforms that is able to engage, interact, we want to hear from you. Another subject that I would say UBS probably has very, very deep resources on is kind of and some of it relates to sovereign and changing dynamics around the world. I look at consistent hubs over decades of great wealth and finance centers as New York, as London, as broadly Switzerland, as a country in Hong Kong, which is kind of unique. But I see the rise of the United Arab Emirates, of Singapore, and other domiciles and locations, jurisdictions, if you loosely want to use that term. What is some of the insights that you're seeing globally and how kind of the world is evolving?
Yeah, I mean, UBS, we're a global wealth manager, so we do have those insights. I will say I see a little bit of it on my end in a few different ways. And I'm going to come back to, you've got the rise, but you still have the rise of the US. And I'll get into why. So, I mean, listen, Dubai, Abu Dhabi, those are going to continue to grow. Singapore, you've got a lot of incentives for family offices standing up there. And I think a lot of these jurisdictions are trying to attract these ultra high net worth families and dynastic families. And so you're going to continue to see these ecosystems in these certain cities and jurisdictions continue to rise for obvious reasons. I mean, my good friend Tayyab Mohammed from Agreus just relocated from London to Dubai because of the growth of family offices there. He's a family office recruiter. I see a lot of it, frankly, on Bloomberg and stuff. I will say the US as a family office hub and a ultra high net worth hub is going to continue to grow. And I see this coming out of Latin America and South America. There's a few reasons for this. One, if you look at the US, it's basically a giant network, and it's hard to unseat these networks. We've got rule of law here, and it's just a great place to be. You've got talent, you've got the deepest markets. So I know your question was like, hey, we've got these other jurisdictions, and I do see some of these families and interact with them. Primarily, I'm just doing US domestic, but I'm working on some governance matters for some Middle Eastern families, some Asian families. But they all want to be in the U.S. They all want to have some sort of toehold in the U.S. For the most part. But what's interesting about the other centers is, the U.S. is the deepest market, but primarily you see people coming into the U.S. You often don't see a lot of U.S. families going out and setting up shop there. I mean, here and there you'll see it a little bit. So I just think it's interesting. I think the U.S. Has the best ecosystem for it. So those are, and it's always great to engage with those families for different cultural reasons. I'm always learning from them as well, especially on the governance end and how they make decisions.
Indeed, that's all very important. And there are two of them, Forbes 30, very prominent, that opened up what I'll define as satellite single family offices in Singapore. And I believe one of them also in Switzerland, which I think is a good move. And depending on the size of the family and their scale and their concerns about sovereign issues, I am an advocate of maintaining multiple passports, optionality, and understanding satellite offices and boots on the ground in locations like some of the ones we're talking about. The world is changing. US is still king, but it's complicated. And some of the geopolitical conversations and others that I've had and I have upcoming will address some of those issues as well. A very broad question, but I'm not so sure, maybe not among the most interesting in terms of to the audience. And that would be, because your ear is right there on the grindstone being at UBS, what are significant trends? And I know we covered some of them, but if you maybe had to recap them or add something new, significant trends that you're seeing among single family offices.
So a few of the trends are, you're going to still see the growth of single family offices.
Yay, I like that.
Right. The other one is compensation for family offices is so opaque.
Oh,
for a number of reasons. We get questions on, specifically with the investment professionals, on long-term comp around the carry, maybe co-investment, leverage co-investment, sometimes phantom equity. And these are very challenging for family office employees to figure out for a number of reasons. One, it's not like, hey, I'm going to go to Blackstone and I know, right? You know, you're getting a 2 and 20, and then as an employee, right, like you're kind of in lockstep oftentimes. In a family office environment, you know, it's what assets am I going to get maybe a piece of the carry on? How big is that pool of assets? What's the strategy? And by the way, is that going to change over time? Because you might have say, hey, we're going to allocate whatever 10% to directs. 3 years later, the family comes back and says, I don't know about that, right? So
it happens all the time.
So it's a very opaque environment. It's a challenging environment, but you're going to continue to see these questions around compensation. You're going to continue to see data flowing out from like the likes of Agreus, right? And it's very helpful, but it's never determinative because it's always apples to oranges, because you've got the portfolios are different, the family philosophy is different. So you're going to continue to see a lot of content around compensation strategies, because family offices are constantly struggling with this because it's just super opaque.
100%. Totally agree. And we'll probably have upcoming in September Trish Botoff, who years ago I interviewed. I've known her for probably 20 years, as one of the leaders in research and compensation. I'm not saying the only one. I'm sure there's multiple good ones. And by the way, if you happen to be one of them that is listening in, that is definitely one of the subjects that I'm looking to do more on. And living through a little bit of it, like I hinted earlier, with a holding company and structuring equity or phantom equity. So I got some very targeted questions on both the research and ideas and creativity in that arena for family offices to be most attractive. I think my question following up on the trends was actually related to what you just mentioned. So you beat me to the punch a little bit. And that relates a little bit around the most important thing in a family office, I'm sure you'll agree, is it may not even be close. It's people. I could argue systems/operations and lately tech stack, mainly due to the advancements in AI, is number 3. We could debate those, but you can't really debate that people are number 1. I'm sure this is a question you get asked. I know it's going to bring a chuckle to your face because I get asked it, I don't know, maybe 20 times a month. Angelo, so I'm going to rephrase the question to your name. Mark, how do I get a job in a single family office? How do you answer that?
You know, I'm going to start with my own story. I had a backwards career path. I actually started my career at a family office back in 2008, pre-financial crisis. Family offices weren't all the rage then. I was my first year of law school. I needed an internship. I looked up an attorney I knew, and I had an internship, but I stayed there for 10 years, and it was like,
wow,
probably the greatest professional experience I have ever had. Although I love UBS, it's great. I kind of fell into it. Oftentimes you see family office employees or executives, you're at a professional service firm, you get to know the family, they ask you to come on because they trust you, they know you, right? The other one is you worked at their business, they had a liquidity event, they need somebody to stand the infrastructure up, they need somebody they know and trust. You've known them for 20 years, you get the job at the family office as employee number 1. And the other one is through LinkedIn and through recruiters. I mean, there's some recruiters that have those, Linda Mack, Agreus, Lisa Ryan is great. Getting to know them all, if you look at the job descriptions, they all want 10, 15 years of family office experience. I think that is helpful. But obviously with the growth of family offices, you've had a number of people that didn't have that experience. So I think that's a nice to have, but I don't think it's always true. But I would say get to know the industry. I talk to a lot of investment professionals, right, that I meet coming through the UBS ecosystem. They're not UBS employees, but they're at a hedge fund or a private equity fund. They're like, I want to go family office. I'm like, listen, it's the opportunity is not as great as you think, right? So you got to look at what you're giving up to go into the family office. And it really just depends. I enjoyed it, but I think it's the recruiters, I think it's working at a professional service firm. You get to know the family on some sort of level. And I think understanding the ecosystem, right, I think those are probably the best ways to do it.
100%. And Linda's awesome, but because that's a question I get so much, and I do agree that recruiters could be very important, I'm going to hair crap if I don't mention that there's definitely others as well, along with Linda, that are awesome. Gray Pools in New York, Jane Beerworth, Neil Kreutzberger out on the West Coast, Phil Strassler himself in Florida and New York, Renee Neary at Heidrick and Struggles, Mark
Yes.
Somers in the UK, and there's others. I'm 1,000% sure of that. But understanding and being part of the community, being interactive on LinkedIn, like you noted, going to industry events is intriguing, because if I'm running a true family office program and you're looking for a job, like, why do I want you there? That's one thing. And I want to keep it tight in terms of my members that are real and qualified to be there. But if you are legitimately qualified to potentially work in an SFO, now I'm not a recruiter. I'm more than happy to talk to people, but usually I would pass you on to a recruiter, and they're professionals at what they do. But absolutely no bones about it. The number one, the most important thing in a family office is its people, which does relate to my practice management and best practices work in my masterclass about how to create and reimagine into a top 1% family office. I mean, the people is going to be, let me go with 85% of it, followed by effectively systems and AI/technologies. You also organize internally at UBS, and we're heading to the home stretch, everyone, the quarterly family office report. If you could talk a little bit about that and maybe highlight with a little bit of context or synopsis, one or two of the recent articles that might have appeared, other than the AI one that you already mentioned.
Yeah. So the quarterly was an initiative, that we thought of through our group, Family Office Solutions. It harkens back to my family office days where you're on an island, you're in a collaborative environment, but there's not a lot of like non-investment stuff out there, right, being written. There is, but they're like one-off articles, but there was no central sort of location. I know there's a couple publications out there, but I said, listen, we should do this. And if we do it, I also want to sort of open architecture it, meaning I don't want it just to be UBS, because I think there's a great opportunity to bring thought leadership from recruiters, from law firms, from the tech stack folks, right? And so in actual family offices themselves. And so, it took probably a year to get off the ground, and we've had a great response to it. And we're hoping, we're going to pump it out every quarter. It's a heavy lift, I would say. I wrote an article recently on sort of, hey, how do you approach insourcing and outsourcing, or at least solution sourcing? Like, what are the factors, considerations, and different roles you should look at? That was, my most recent article. I did one on investment committee build. We had one, Charles Soriano. He was at a family office doing post-investment support, right? So you go and invest in a company, right? Thinking of like GP style. And how do you get it to perform and optimize it after that, right? We had another, Leora Zach, a colleague of mine, had a conversation with the family office out of Cleveland, Next Spark, because the common question is like, hey, we're a family office, how do we get deal flow?
That is about the most common question too, yes.
This family office also has a GP, control, kind of private equity style about them. And they said, listen, we don't want to like just sit there passively for stuff to come across our desk. So they actually hired a biz dev person to go run off, to go call companies that they thought they would like to own and take to the next level. So that was a conversation Leora had with the Next Spark folks out of Ohio. So we're going to start running with themes on this quarterly, meaning the first couple were just like a collection of different articles. There was no theme. So if you think about it, I want to do one at the intersection of family office, family business. I want to do one that has sort of an estate planning wealth transfer. We're going to do one that's family advisory and philanthropy focused. So we're going to start running with themes to kind of cluster relevant articles together, but from kind of different perspectives. But it's been a great response, and I really like doing it. And I really enjoy also looping in third parties like Patrick McCurry and McDermott, who just wrote a great article on family office compensation, thinking, carry, co-investment, phantom equity. So it's been great, and it's also been enjoyable to do.
Of course, and we do appreciate, of course, you coming on and the breadth of resources and research at the organization, which again, everyone knows UBS. But if you wanted to maybe talk for a minute about how the organization, including you being a resource to families that engage with the organization, UBS, the value they provide from investing to direct deals to opportunity to be introduced to other families to banking, custodial, lending. There's so many services, it would probably take an hour to list them all. But if you had to summarize the value of UBS to significant families, what would you say?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I appreciate this, by the way. So when I was looking to kind of move on, right, from my last role, I was at an RIA, helped them build out their family office service practice. I started talking to large banks, and I will say that UBS was the first one that kind of spoke my language. I said, listen, here's who I worked with. It was a complex family, and I think it was Ann Berkey she heads up the advanced planning, which I call our in-house law firm, right? They both wealth transfer, estate planning, income tax. So yeah, that's great. She's like, we bank 1 out of every 2 billionaires. That's all you're going to do. You're going to engage with these types of families. So they really spoke my language. It wasn't like we have an investment bank, but it wasn't like that investment banking culture, right? And if you look at UBS as a whole, this is a broader kind of statement, like 60 to 70% of our revenues come from wealth management, meaning families and individuals. So they really sink and invest a lot of resources there, me being one of them, right? Helping families stand up their own family office. So with that said, I'm on Family Office Solutions. We're a team of around 25 of experts, cross-disciplinarians, meaning it's a cross-disciplinary team that includes advanced planning, so income tax advisory, so going through a liquidity event, or how do you get a state income tax move, the fiduciary trust site is somewhere else. So we've got the law firm component, we've got myself, we've got client solution specialists that are acting as quarterbacks for these families within the bank, helping to pull in resources. We have family advisory and philanthropy services, which is, a great resource. And I'll spend a little time here. Philanthropy is helping families kind of think through mission and vision and what you want to do with your philanthropic dollars, and also how you, the other side of that team is family advisory, right? So we're all one team, but family advisory is, who are you as a family? What are your values? What do you stand for? How do you sit around the table and talk and interact? And we're going to help you facilitate that conversation, to have the conversations that you just can't seem to have, right? So it helps to have that neutral third party in the room. And I've seen this team, because I work with a number of those professionals, I've seen this team do wonders. And so I've been a big proponent of them. And so like I said, we're a collection of teams. We handle the largest families at the bank. And so it's a great environment, a learning environment. And having been at a family office, right, I love the collaboration of, I could go talk to our investment professionals, our tax professionals. And it's the same, frankly, feel being at UBS on Family Office Solutions, because it's cross-disciplinarian, right? And so I'm still dealing with the tax and the legal folks, and the family advisory, philanthropy, and the investment folks, like Brian Fermento. So appreciate the plug there. We are the wealth management bank. We are geared towards and resourced towards the individuals and the family offices.
And Mark, for those that are interested and specifically want to reach out to you and learn more about your services within UBS and the organization, how could they learn more and reach out to you?
Yeah, so I would attempt to give you my email address, but they threw my middle initial in there, and my last name is challenging. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we could figure out a time to connect. So that's probably.
And that is Mark with a K, last name Tepsich, spelled T as in Tom, EP as in Peter, ICH. And if somehow that gets lost in translation, definitely follow Mark on LinkedIn. Worst case, you could always reach out to me. I'm happy to make a connection. It's a great fit. Mark is a great fit inside of UBS. UBS is a great resource, and he adds to it. So I want to hope you all enjoyed today's discussion. I guess on behalf of Mark and myself, one, thank you. I'll have a close in a second, but always a reminder, you're hearing this from our opinions and our perspective here in the midsummer of 2024. Conditions change. Situations change. This may be evergreen. Parts of it is on governance and culture. Maybe 50 years from now, that would be applicable. Other things, dynamics change rapidly, and opinions could also change. This is strictly for informational and really educational from our perspective at the moment, in our opinion, and entertainment purposes. At the end of the day, do your own diligence and make your own decisions. From my perspective, it was great to have Mark on. I respected him from afar, the community, and getting to know him a little bit in the last 2 months is awesome, and adds to not only the depth of my dream team and my connections, but to my knowledge, as I learned so much from him and others who are incredible in the community. I hope you enjoyed our wide-ranging discussion today. And if you would like to learn more and be active, first of all, very simply at minimal, it's free. Subscribe to @FamilyOffice on YouTube. Yes, I got that great name kind of when YouTube first launched. I was very fortunate. No, I don't want to get any offers for it. It's not for sale. And @FamilyOffice TV, second YouTube channel that sometimes I have slightly different content on. Follow me as well on LinkedIn. You can find me, and simply go to angelorobles.com and learn more about membership at my SFO Continuity, limited to 30 founding members, and the proprietary research, work, connectivity, access to people like Mark and certain content that others do not have access to. And additionally, like I stated, legitimately over 12 months, over 30 different private programs around the world, mainly the US, in New York and Palm Beach, and to some extent greater Jackson Hole and LA that we host, and join, be a part. And we are extremely active this summer. So I look forward to being of service. Thank you all for listening and or watching, whether it's live and in the moment or in a recording. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for many of your kind words. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. And Mark, again, thanks for being a great guest. I appreciate you. Thank you.
Angelo, thank you, and likewise.
My pleasure. Have a great day. Bye-bye.